It's incredibly convenient that, oh, now we got it. Incredibly convenient that Youssef was talking about user-generated content and user-generated AR stories, and now we have Ray Soto from USA Today talking about the USA Today network's use of augmented reality. So we've had a discussion about user-generated content using augmented reality. Now, how do the big, gigantic, and legacy organizations that are moving into this field, how do they do it, and how do they work with and experiment with this? And that's why Ray Soto is here. Thank you.
All right. I should have queued up my presentation before, so you saw some of my notes. But regardless, I'm really, really excited to be here and share a few details when it comes to our emerging technology journey. What we've been doing, how we've gotten here, where we anticipate these technologies will allow us to grow and to really start to tell stories in a very different manner, a way that we like to say allows a user an opportunity to explore and discover stories. But before I get there, and I think this might be difficult, I'm going to try it. Let's see if some of you would want to kind of move up a bit more. I mean, we're all really spread out in such a big room. I thought it'd be worth a try. I don't expect anyone to, but let's make this more of a fireside chat. I thought it'd be kind of fun. Oh, wow. All right. This is great. Thank you.
When we're this size, you can embarrass all of us.
And I promise I'll be right in the front for the next few sessions. You are all amazing. Thank you. Thank you. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. As Gary had said, I am Ray Soto from the USA Today Network, and I am the Director of Emerging Technologies. And this is a role that I did not anticipate to be in. I actually have a video game development background. I worked at EA, I worked at NCSoft, and my team is composed of former video game developers that include Disney Animation Studios and as well as EA. So I feel that's relevant to mention because what happened is when you consider these technologies are very much driven on 3D content creation and interactivity. There's a lot that we could layer it on top of there, but that provides that opportunity, as I mentioned, to explore and discover the stories. But let me share a little bit more about our journey. 5 years ago, Gannett had reached out to me to see if I was interested in supporting a virtual reality interactive. And at the time, this was before Facebook even bought Oculus. So I was really excited at the opportunity to drive and create content using these technologies before they were even proven. It was more of an experiment. And USA Today recognized that as well. So what they ended up doing was creating a VR piece telling the story of a 4-generation farm in Iowa. Now, you wouldn't think that's very tech-forward and leading, but it made sense for the story at the time. For us, it's more about creating content that connects with local communities, but able to tell their stories in new ways on a much more national and broader level. And that's where we saw the opportunity. So Harvest of Change, at the time, you consider it was created with 3D visuals, an interactive representation of their farm, combined with 360-degree videos, was very, very difficult for us to do, but we were able to accomplish it. And that was our first journey through emerging tech. Beyond that, we started to experiment a little bit more and go bigger. And what I mean by that is building up a team to support 360 VR content creation. We started focusing on the 360 storytelling side, the visuals, how do things work together. We were the first to create a syndicated weekly news series called Virtually There. We created 2 seasons of 72 episodes. Significant engagement, did very well for us, and was actually a collaboration with YouTube as well, which was fantastic. But for us, you could start to see this journey of interactive storytelling, visual storytelling, and it culminated within, we were very fortunate to be a part of the Wall project, which was a major initiative. For those of you who weren't too familiar with it, we ended up winning a Pulitzer Prize because of it. It was a very complex story, but we're telling the story of Trump's proposed border wall along the US-Mexico border and the impacts it would have along the entire border through the lens of different communities and different issues. And what I'm talking about, more so than just the drug trafficking, migrant crossings, but also communities divided, the impact to the agriculture and the species there. There was a lot that's really later on. And the VR component was really, let's see if we could leverage LiDAR and photogrammetry to recreate 3 distinct locations to provide an opportunity for a user to stand at the border to really understand that this is a very, very complex issue. Being able to tell stories of a national park, a community divided. So it was very much an opportunity that we had recognized and wanted to do something different. And when you consider what we had learned early on to 360 storytelling, to this VR project in the wall, it made sense, and we're very, very fortunate to be recognized with a prestigious award. But then we get to augmented reality, and that is a journey where we're currently at today. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the rest of the projects with 321 and what we've been doing within the USA Today app, but you'll start to kind of see this thread from a technology perspective, understanding the audience, building on top of that, and ensuring that we can support content creation at scale, and ultimately where we feel it's going. What I'll start with is, I had already mentioned this, so I'll skip this one. But why augmented reality? I had mentioned earlier, I mentioned two words, explore and discover. We see this opportunity through interactivity for a user to drive the narrative, to be able to explore a story and discover those bits of nuggets and information that encourages them to dive deeper into it. And we've done this for different types of stories. We're not just going for the fun stuff, and granted, it's great content to work on, but sports and entertainment, but really, investigative stories as well. And I'll share some of the details, but for us, it makes sense. When you consider USA Today has a rich culture rich history of innovation, augmented reality and these technologies really just build upon that legacy. We're trying to enhance it, we're trying to reach new audiences, and we're trying to provide that value add, considering where we feel AR is going to be heading 5 to 10 years from now. Now, the differentiator. For us, we wanted to make sure that what we were adding to our apps and what we're doing within AR is different than what others are doing. And as I mentioned, we're video game developers. So for us, it's all about interactivity. It's all about being able to see where the user is going. What can we learn from that and essentially adapt as we need to. But we really do see this future in which we won't have mobile devices anymore. Folks will not be consuming content on a traditional mobile or desktop web. Very much eyewear driven, persistent data. We want to be one of the first news platforms on those devices that I mentioned. So we're building that understanding, we're building that workflow, and we're working very, very closely with our journalists across our 109 markets to be able to kind of lay that foundation and see where we can go based on our learnings. And we've been very, very fortunate. As I mentioned, we are making industry waves. Folks, most recently, earlier this year, Fast Company recognized the USA Today Network as one of the most innovative companies in the world in VR and AR, in the number 4 spot, just behind Adobe. So for us, that's telling us that we are going in the right direction. This makes sense. Let's continue to build and expand. But our first AR project. This particular project was a collaboration with our market down in Florida Today, and they are our space experts. They are on the Space Coast. They cover all the launches coming out of Kennedy Space Center. And we decided to explore a story. What can we do for the audiences that are there watching these launches live with AR? And the initial concept that the editorial team had reached out to us with was, let's just see if we could create a companion app for those who are down there. Well, we wanted to layer it on, understand a little bit more, and we were essentially trying to see what we can do with this loose concept. And we ended up heading down to Kennedy Space Center for a few visits. We had private tours of NASA. We were able to watch a few launches, and for us, it was really kind of dive deep into, what do we feel an audience would like most, and what is a story that we can tell that really drives that interactivity and that engagement. And what we discovered through that entire process is we can go bigger. So while the initial concept was that companion app, we were thinking almost along the lines of those star trackers, satellite trackers that you see. And having the opportunity to learn as much as we did within a few short days, we concepted the idea of creating a live augmented reality broadcast of launches out of Kennedy Space Center. So imagine for anyone around the world using the 321 launch app, getting a notification, and being able to tune in and watch a Falcon 9 rocket launch an exact sequence with live video and commentary, just as it is out of Launch Pad 39A at Kennedy Space Center. So we had to do several tests. It was, again, just a concept. We knew it was something that we could support, but ultimately we had to return back to Kennedy Space Center. We wanted to make sure we were telling the stories that mattered, not just on the live side, but the offline interactive story of how a mission works. And as I mentioned before, and I'll keep saying these two words, explore and discover, we created a lightweight interactive for users to be able to build a Falcon 9, and understand some of the terminology that is being thrown out during the live broadcast. But also those moments of really understanding and breaking things down so they can walk away from this better educated, and at the same time to encourage them to come back for the live broadcast. So as an example, for those of you who have watched launches, you'll see the water towers. And those water towers actually aren't to cool the launch pad. It's actually to dampen the vibrations from the rocket blast, which is so strong they could crack the foundations. And those are those little moments that I was mentioning where users can walk around this virtual launch pad, tap on the content annotation, be able to learn little nuggets like that. But ultimately for us, the big win was being able to really determine, can we create an AR live broadcast? And we had two tests, two launches to test this against. And the second one was the most exciting. The first one was far off. I would say that the launch was in sequence, but it was a few miles off. But our second one and our last one that we had to test against, we were standing on the top of our press box, which is across the street from the vertical assembly building, and they were doing a ULA Atlas V launch out of the, just out in the distance. And NASA and all their family were off to the side here, and my colleagues and I were on the roof. And when the launch had happened, we could see everything working in sequence. The three of us are cheering on this roof while all of NASA is cheering off to the other side for the actual rocket. We knew we had something special. And this is what we had. So, as I had mentioned, this particular project was just a way for us to learn user behavior habits. What does it take to actually support content creation for AR? So we developed this as a standalone app. And to our surprise, it was a success. We had very, very modest KPIs. And what I mean by that is when leadership was asking me, what do I expect to get out of this? I said maybe 10,000 downloads if we're lucky. The app was released on March 26th of last year, and to our surprise, it was featured by Apple within the new apps we love, which changed everything for us. So we ended up receiving 75,000 downloads within 3 days, and the engagement spikes were phenomenal. And for us, what we realized through that is this does work. Now, if you notice with some of these data points that I have up here, the average time spent during a live launch being almost 7 minutes is phenomenal. And that really, really surprised us. And considering that almost 15,000 users were able to actually watch this broadcast over 30 minutes, that was great. That was telling us, okay, folks know how to use AR. They understand this technology. They understand what we're trying to do through a storytelling lens. But what was interesting is those were the only folks that could actually get into the live experience. Since we had modest goals, there were probably about 30,000 other folks who were pinging who couldn't get into the live broadcast. So we knew, okay, this is definitely something that we should be investing in. And that's what we ended up doing. Immediately after the launch of 321 launched the app, we decided now is the right time to integrate AR capabilities within the USA Today native apps. And as game developers and with what we ended up noticing through interactivity, we were we were convinced that we had to integrate our own AR platform. So what we ended up doing was utilizing the Unity game development engine. And what that does is that allows us to control what it is that we want to do, and from interactivity, animations, being able to layer in as much content as we can, but really make it a robust interactive experience. So what we ended up doing was working with Apple to try to get information. They weren't too sure how to do it. Unity wasn't too sure how to do it, but collaborating with our product division, with our designers, with the engineers, we're able to integrate it within about 4 months with a very, very little impact to the app, and we rolled it out in July of last year. And while it took us quite a long time to actually pull this off, we knew that we were really committed. We knew we had to get this in there because we not only wanted to reach our existing audience, but we wanted to attract a new audience who might not be too familiar with what USA Today might be doing from a storytelling perspective, but also how we're really driving innovation, how we're trying to tell stories in new ways. So we're really trying to kind of, cross that bridge between, kind of a legacy, organization to, okay, we're doing some really amazing things, especially with augmented reality. And we proved out our AR toolset with The City. And for those of you who don't know, The City is a podcast series that was released last year. Season 1 was about a neglected community just south of Chicago in North Lawndale. And this particular community, in the late 80s, early 90s, there was an illegal dump 6 stories high, right across the street from a school, next to neighborhoods, next to businesses, completely neglected, forgotten. And through this, the investigations that ended up happening, there was a term that was coined, environmental racism, which really stuck with us. Like, this is a story we can tell, but how can we tell it? And this conversation to try to figure out what can we do started off at another journalism conference. I ended up speaking with Robin Amer, who is the lead producer on the series. Someone introduced her to me, and we were just trying to figure out, what can we do? How can we collaborate? Is there something there? And with each of these projects, we don't want to treat them as a gimmick, but we want to find what is that one piece of nugget, that one thing that really sticks out that makes it perfect for AR. So we didn't have it at the time, but what she did was send me a short segment of the podcast, essentially the trailer that she had built to get this pitched. And this is what we have.
And so the story of what happened on this lot, the story I want to tell you, stunned me despite everything I already knew about Chicago, about how corrupt and ruthless it can be, about how stark the divisions are between black and white, rich and poor, between the people who hoard power and the people who will fight for their fair share.
Anytime you see anybody drive over in a vacant lot in a limo, you know it's no good.
This story is about a giant illegal dump, 6 stories high.
A limo showing up, they're up to no good. A giant illegal dump. That's all we needed to know to decide we are going to support this. But how are we going to support it? So rather than telling the entire story, we treated this as an augmented reality trailer to promote the podcast. Now, when we first pitched this idea, folks thought we were crazy. They couldn't really quite grasp what we were doing and why we were doing it, but it made perfect sense. Through augmented reality, we can tease the story. We can provide an opportunity for the residents to speak to the dump, content annotations. You could see the school and hear, spatial audio that we had captured of children playing. So it feels as if it's a little bit more immersive and folks are actually moving the camera around to get a sense of proximity. But when you see the scale of this dump, it's higher than any of the building in this general area. There's something special about it. There's something that really hits you. And it worked. It was one of those things where we had strong engagement throughout the entire length of the promotion, which was about a week. And the session times, again, similar to what we had with 321, were similar engagement lengths with minutes. So I want to say we reached around 3.5 minutes. We were expecting around 2, but to be able to almost double that told us, okay, folks are interested in this story. We're telling it in a new way. And folks were going to the subscription page to actually subscribe to the podcast. So it's rethinking what we can do beyond just the gimmick of a 3D model through interactivity and really kind of just driving that engagement to tell these types of stories. So when you consider 2018 was more along the lines of, okay, let's learn, let's lay the foundation, let's understand user behavior habits. For us, 2019 was really, let's prove out our workflow and scale it to be able to support our markets. And the first project we worked on in January of this year was an opportunity to meet with an all-star defenseman from the Washington Capitals. And being in DC, obviously fans of the Caps, but more importantly, this took very, very little effort because they are in our backyard. So we had the opportunity to meet with the athlete. We drove on out to the practice facilities. We met with him for about half an hour to create an AR experience. But we wanted to leverage a process called photogrammetry. And I'm not sure if any of the other presenters yesterday, Dan Pacheco might have mentioned it, but photogrammetry is the process of taking several photographs with overlap, throwing it through a rendering engine to be able to create a 3D asset. And we wanted to prove out that workflow as an AR experience to capture figures, not just objects. And for this particular project, it fell flat. It did not work, but that was okay because of what we could gain from that. And what I mean by that is it was very much a linear experience. We had 3 3D models of John Carlson in different poses. There was a beginning, a middle, and an end, but you had to go through one to get to the next. And engagement lengths weren't great. 1 minute and 8 seconds was not very good for us, and there was a steep, steep drop off. So folks would look at the first model and just drop out. We were very lucky if anyone got into the second, and I would say just maybe 1% of the users reached the third model and actually completed the experience. So that told us that we had to rethink how we were delivering this content, how we were thinking about interactive storytelling, leveraging content annotations applied to a photogrammetry asset. And we learned quite a bit, and again, it was okay that we had failed, but we wanted to just prove out the workflow, and we were able to do so within about a week. So where did we go from there? The second project that quickly spooled up was to being able to show users the costume, Oscar-nominated costumes. And this particular project was an exciting one for us because based on what we had learned, we wanted to take a slightly different approach. But since we understood the photogrammetry process, we were very, very comfortable being able to fly out to LA, capture all of the costumes that we needed. So we no longer had to worry about the how, and we could focus on the story itself. And as I mentioned before, when it was the John Carlson piece, it was very much a linear experience. This one we used a photo gallery carousel-like entry point. And we recognized that we had to change it a little bit more because when you have 6 different costumes, folks might just want to go straight to the costume that they're more interested in, but we wanted to provide the opportunity for folks to go to the others. So as you see in the second frame there, we integrated a sliding carousel. Folks go to Black Panther, Bohemian Rhapsody, Black Klansman, and on from there. But what was great for us was being able to really provide that experience that folks will see the costume rendered in their living room, wherever they might be, and they can actually physically walk around and see some of these moments, the details of these costumes. So you could hear Ruth Carter speak to the red leather is indicative of the red clay that this tribe would cover their bodies in. The stitching is representative of scarification. So you can really see these details in almost lifelike renderings, and it did work for us. It was a very tight production schedule, but for us, it's that engagement time, almost 6 minutes. So that told us right then that this carousel experience, to be able to drive engagement through these different costumes, to be able to hear the costume designer speak to these elements, does work. But what was surprising to us is how deep users were going into the experience. So we knew that Black Panther was going to be the most engaged with. I mean, it was the most popular film at the time. It was the first costume available within the carousel. But surprisingly, Mary Poppins Returns was the second most engaged with, and it's the last one within the stack. So that told us folks were going into Black Panther, coming out, actually scrolling through and engaging with another piece of content, and being the last in the stack told us they are diving deep into these content experiences. And we proved out the workflow. It only took us 16 days because when you consider the nominees weren't announced until 16 days before the day of the event. So as soon as we got into the office that morning, we started reaching out to the movie studios. We started reaching out to the costume designers, and we're able to get access to everything that we had wanted. It was definitely complicated, but with the support of our editorial team, the support of the studios, the designers, and really the Fashion Institute in LA, who happen to have all these costumes already set up for us, we were able to get access without any interruptions and be able to create this experience. And here's a preview.
Freddie Mercury's style is unique, outrageous, and gender-bending. We interviewed Julian Day, costume designer for the film, who shared the challenges recreating Freddie's iconic royal look for that crazy party scene.
One of the challenges in representing Freddie Mercury in this film was to make sure that the fans were happy, because he's got such a huge fan base and they're really loyal.
So as you can see, it's the opportunity to really explore and discover those little moments, being able to see that costume and those details up close and really hear from the designers themselves their creative inspiration behind some of these elements, and in this example, Freddie Mercury's royal outfit. So then what came up next, we had several different projects in between, but this one I think is relevant. As I mentioned, we no longer have to worry about the how, we can focus on the story itself. And this one I actually had nothing to do with. And what I mean by that is I was on vacation, I was in Africa, and I promised my wife I wasn't going to check email. But when I ended up receiving a bit of connectivity, I checked my work email, and I saw something come along the lines of, all right, let's publish this, let's spool up development to tell the story of the Notre Dame fire in AR. And I'm freaking out. I'm telling my team, talk to these people, coordinate with these people, make sure you do this, this, and that. I hit send, and I realized, wait, this has already happened. And what they ended up creating really surprised me. It took them 8 hours to develop an AR experience, working with someone on the editorial team, but to tell the story of what was affected and how it was affected. It was a unique perspective, but really it was relevant, and it was such a quick turnaround time. And again, it just shows that these tool works. But what impressed us even more was the engagement time, which it was a very short experience, about a minute and a half, so almost about a 50% completion rate within the experience. But when you consider the low lift effort it took, it was very, very relevant. The audience is engaging with this type of content. Just shows, I'll keep reiterating, it does work. But ultimately what this project did as well is it told our entire editorial staff that, okay, there are other projects that might come up, let's start talking. Because beforehand, it was a lot of, from us, advocating, all right, let's work on a piece of project. What story are you working on? Is there an AR component? What can we do? But through this one here and how easy it was for editorial to be able to work with us, we're starting to have more and more conversations as far as what we can do. Our next project was in celebration of the Team USA's journey to the World Cup. And we ended up creating 2 unique AR experiences. It was a very complex development pipeline. We're supporting several different projects at the same time. But when Team USA says, yeah, you can come out and meet Alyssa Naher, who is the lead goalkeeper, you kind of just have to jump on that opportunity. So what we did was we split the interactives into 2 stories. The first one was meet the team. You have all these amazing athletes, but you may only know of 1 or 2, the folks who have high profiles, lots of sponsorships and on from there. But we wanted to create we ended up creating a virtual pitch with a series of content hotspots where users can see who the athletes are, the positions that they play, but get some information via a bio pop-up. But we also kept it relevant by updating the standings within the tournament, the scores as they were happening, and the next game. What we ended up noticing is there was significant engagement throughout the length of the tournament, but very, very heavy spikes on Team USA versus France, the finals as well. So that was great to see. But we also did something different that we hadn't done before, and that was an interactive mini game. So through our interview with Alyssa Naher, we had asked her, what's the most difficult part about your role on the team? And she said blocking penalty kicks. And that little nugget there told us, well, what if we create an AR experience to scale in which you'll see someone kicking a penalty kick to you up to speeds of 80 miles per hour. And through AR, users can either move left, stay in the middle, or move right to try to block these penalty kicks. So you're essentially stepping into her cleats. And both projects did very well for us, but it was the meet the team experience, which did not have the game component, that was a very lightweight development cycle, had the most engagement for us. So it lets us know, again, that interactive gaming does work, but introducing unique elements for folks to learn more about upcoming events, tentpole items, I guess you could say, does work out well for us. And then we revisited space. This past summer was the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11 mission and the moon landing. And we collaborated again with Florida Today. And for this particular project, we ended up recreating the launch over 8 days in real time within the 321 launch app. So folks could essentially use the app, have a notification to tune in, and watch the Saturn V rocket lift off at 9:32 a.m. on July 16th, just as it did 50 years ago. So similar to the initial concept of the augmented reality experience with the Falcon 9, now they would see the Saturn V take off with archived historical, you see videos in the background, so you're being guided throughout the entire mission. We would send notifications of different maneuvers, when they were about to land, when they were returning. And all of this was guided by information that the Smithsonian provided us. So we knew exactly when these moments were happening. We knew how to animate these moments. So the sequencing was exactly on time based on the information that we had. And if there are moments that we didn't know, fortunately, we were able to reach out to our contacts at NASA and again, the Smithsonian, who would either say, no one knows what that's like, but we'll work with you to do a representation that we feel would have happened. So such as a few stage separations and whatnot, but nothing too crazy. And within the USA Today app, we ended up creating the experience to learn more about the technology and the hardware that got us there. So again, it's diving deeper, being able to explore and discover the stories and really drive the users to more of our content. And it did well for us. When you consider 321 almost had 14 million seconds of total engagement, but it's that engagement time that really tells us, okay, people are consuming this content. Let's see where we can go to from next. And this is where we ended up working with a very powerful investigative project. So this is our version of the 1619 commemoration. 400 years ago, the first enslaved Africans arrived in America. And I was pulled into an editorial leadership meeting, and I was just there as a fly on the wall, just learning more about the direction that the editorial team wanted to take. And they were going around the room asking folks, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And all eyes came to me and said, Ray, what do you think about an AR experience tied to 1619? And the first thing I said was, this isn't a story that we should be telling. I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? Ultimately, what we ended up doing was collaborating with well-known African-American poets, writers, and artists. This was a story that we felt should be a strong collaboration, but not just with folks who are the storytellers. And while we visualize and recreate an immersive experience, but really being able to work closely with researchers, not just from our editorial team, but the Smithsonian and Hampton History Museum, which is very, very important considering the context of this story. So when you consider, we recreated the interior of the San Juan Bautista ship, and what we learned through the research is this particular ship was not similar to the design of all of the drawings that folks are very familiar with the rows and rows of the enslaved. At the time, they were just throwing, folks and binding them within the tween deck, which is, just below the deck. Very, very cramped, very, very dark. The crew would sleep amongst them. I mean, this is before enslavement became industrialized. But it was through this process that we recognized, well, let's get folks into the ship. And we did that through this immersive experience where they can learn the entire journey from Angola to America. And it was the spatial audio components. So when I show this next video, there's kind of a lead up, but notice how the audio changes from the sounds of being on a beach, which was captured in Angola, and then it slightly changes to feel as if you're actually underneath, enclosed within the shell, underneath water. So there's this spatial audio component to it as well. You can start to hear that audio now.
Our feet blistered and bleeding, we finally arrive at the port of Luanda and gaze upon a beast sitting in the sea. It is the largest ship we have ever seen, and we marvel at the sight. No sooner than we feel the breeze upon our faces do they grab us, sprinkle water on our heads, call us by new names, and sear our flesh with hot irons. We pray to God to deliver his mercy.
So as you can see, it was very, very powerful, and I'm sure you had noticed we had a content warning. As we were working on this project and learning more details about the journey, we wanted to be very transparent that this is an immersive experience. It's going to be very, very powerful, and considering with those heavy audio elements in this particular story with some of the visuals, we wanted to make sure that folks know what they were getting into as opposed to surprising them. And we learned that through testing and getting feedback from the museums and our editorial staff, that this is something we need to integrate within the project just to make sure. So let's just quickly recap where we are in 2019. We had set a goal to publish 12 augmented reality projects this year. And we're at 10, but it's the engagement that's telling us, okay, let's keep pushing things. So right now it's be able to develop our tool set to be able to support content creation at scale, but we're reaching a pretty significant audience when it comes to AR within our native app, but it's the engagement time, almost 50 million seconds of total engagement, and that 95% loyalty rate is telling us that folks are coming back. And for those who aren't too familiar with the loyalty rate, what that is the amount of users that go back to the app within 3 days. So that's 95%, which is fantastic. And not only is the engagement time that you see, 3 minutes, 6 minutes, some maybe just 90 seconds, but users are going directly to our AR content, and then they're going into the rest of the USA Today app to consume other pieces of content, whether it's videos or articles. So this is working. It's just kind of a value add. And we're really excited about where the technology can go beyond where we're at now. But what was said in the previous presentation is there's this long-term vision of these technologies. It's very important to get in now. It's important to us to start to experiment, to understand the audiences, but really to be there so folks understand not just the platform, but that other folks are working with this, and it becomes part of the daily user habit. And we definitely want to be there. Thank you.
Very good. So how big is your team, and how would you divide them up by skill sets?
Yeah. So the core team, they're just 4 of us. I lead the team. I'm a former 3D artist. I can dabble in a little bit more, but ultimately I leverage the rest of the team. So 2 developers and a 3D artist designer. But we expand and contract based on the project. And what I mean by that is editorial teams. Whether it's folks who do the research, photographers, videographers. So something like 1619, I want to say it took about 10 to 12 of us. The John Carlson piece was maybe 3 of us. So it really just depends, but the core team is just 4 of us.
It's impressive that you can do this with 4 people. I mean, for an even smaller team, for say a team of 1 person. I mean, is it feasible? Are there tools that you have access to, or that you would recommend looking into that maybe could help to speed up the process of creating 3D models and taking on some of the tedium that would require a larger team?
Yeah. From our perspective, it depends on the story that you're looking to tell. There are tools readily available when it comes to social AR filters and whatnot. But if you're looking to do the type of stories that we create, look into a process called photogrammetry. And what that does is, we see that as an opportunity to be able to create content at scale. So all our local markets can create a 3D model, they'll send it to us, and we'll package it up and quickly get it out there. So photogrammetry, what that does is there's free tools that are available out there to be able to process several different hundreds of photographs into a 3D model. Look at it's called Agisoft Metashape. Take a look at the Unity game development engine to distribute or to create an interactive experience, just so you can play around with it as an experiment. Take a look at Sketchfab as a way to get the content out there. It's a tool that's already available for online distribution. So there are several out there. I mean, when you consider even, let's say, 5 years ago in the VR landscape, hardly any of these tools were available. I mean, photogrammetry isn't necessarily too new, but it's how we're leveraging it now, which I think is fairly unique, and it's other folks within our industry is using it as well. So that's what I would recommend, kind of starting off with and playing around.
What was the one you mentioned right before Unity?
Metashape, Agisoft, yeah.
Thank you for the amazing presentation. On platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, have you guys had any experimentations there?
We are spooling that up, actually. We are very cognizant of the fact that we are driving engagement to our native apps, but we also want to be able to advocate, hey, reach the audiences where they're at. But for us, it becomes trying to figure out what is it that we distribute from a storytelling perspective. Maybe it's not a story. We're not too sure yet. When you consider that the engagement has worked for us through interactivity, deep stories, but we do recognize that there's an opportunity here as well. So we're having discussions with our social engagement team right now. We're trying to identify possibly some events that we can release a project, see what sticks, and kind of figure out that workflow. It's something that we are looking into, and we've been following it for a bit. So to see your presentation as an example, there is something powerful about it, and I feel like it's something that we should be paying attention to, which is why we've got a 3D content creators now. Let's leverage our social team. Let's see if we collaborate and get it out there.
Kind of to piggyback off of that, you mentioned, the NASA app was a standalone. You mentioned some of these things are available through your traditional app. The city one, how that kind of had a cyclical, it fed more subscriptions. Can you kind of tell us about the flow of users into this content, how you want to push them or how you want them to come to it?
Yeah, so it's really on a project by project basis, obviously. But I'll just use the city as an example. So for us, it becomes a collaboration beyond just the editorial team just to publish this project. With each thing that we publish, we always have a CTA. How do we guide users? How do we use narration to drive users to other pieces of content? Whether it's sports to take them to the NHL page front, whether it's the city to drive them to the landing page to subscribe to the podcast. But what we do is we work with our product team and our editorial team to be able to find slots for promotion within top stories. Then we work with our social teams to help promote, download the interactive experience through the USA Today app. But we also create a lightweight 3D visualization that can be published on the landing page. So we work together so the podcast and editorial team can drive users to the interactive AR piece and vice versa. So ultimately, it really just comes down to, as we're discussing, is identifying, what is that flow and how the interactive can support that. If the goal for the editorial team is to subscribe to a podcast, that's where we ended up thinking, well, let's reformat the interactive story to be a teaser. Let's not give the entire story away, but let's show them a little bit, have them learn a bit about this community and hear from the residents themselves, but let's drive them to the really deep, rich narrative that they've built within the series. So ultimately, it really comes down to, we help each other out, but let's drive downloads through the native app and guide them to the rest of the content. Mm-hmm.
Have you tried connecting your AR experience with e-commerce?
We're exploring that. One of our partners, Review.com, they do top 5 tech gadgets. They review quite a few different things when it comes to products. And while it's not necessarily e-commerce, what I mean by that is we don't want to create an experience that is like IKEA. That's already been done. But what we do see the opportunity is for folks to be able to see objects, understand more about them, and drive it to our content that could possibly be used to drive it to a sponsor. Maybe it's branded content. So for us, it becomes one of those things where let's figure that out a little bit. It's a little bit more nuanced. So we are having a few conversations, but when it comes to recreating those 3D assets, we either just don't have time, the photogrammetry process doesn't work too well, but we are exploring, kind of keeping our eye on it and see what we can do from that perspective. So I don't know if that answers your question specifically, but that's.
I was thinking, like your Oscar TV stuff. Like, if you guys end up doing like the fashion review, like, could you imagine using that as a vehicle to drive to, like, if you want this look, you go shop at Macy's or Nordstrom and.
We're having those conversations with potential clients. Yes,
okay.
Yeah, we are. But there are some nuances though, because the expectations, there are potential sponsors who are still trying to understand the platform, where they see something, and there are some great apps out there where it's, well, I want to be able to put my dress on someone who's standing in front of their mirror. Well, there are some limitations there. But what we could do is like the Oscars experience, where we'll show them what the dress looks like to scale, and then figure out what is that path. So we are having a few conversations here and there. We're definitely following it, but our main focus right now is telling a story more than it is e-commerce.
I think part of your deck, you mentioned how you only increased the app size by 30 megabytes, and it seems like that's a significant accomplishment. I wonder how you guys were able to do that.
A lot of banging our heads against keyboards is the best way I could put it. So no, this was one of those things where it was. We broke down the game engine, the framework, down to its barest bones, and from that, it was pretty small. But it could only support, let's say, viewing a 3D model. So we created a series of scripts. We call them our tools and templates. So these templates that can support the UI elements, that carousel side of things, and it becomes the bare bones of what we would need to tell different types of stories. So that right there is the smallest package, and that's what's 30 megabytes. But what we do through the Unity platform is we dynamically reach out to our CDNs to pull the content, to stream the download in. So that's how we're able to keep the framework size pretty low. None of those stories are already downloaded within the app. It's only called when the user interacts with the web view card or the promo item. All right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you listening to me ramble about the stuff that we've been working on. I appreciate it.